Welcome to today's panel, Are Video Games Getting Weirder? I'm Frances Lupai-Ippolito, and I am going to be moderating today's panel. I don't know much about video games, but I'm very excited to be moderating today's panel to learn more about the state of video games. In particular, is the influence of weird fiction getting more influential in how we play video games or how video games are produced these days? The influence of weird fiction is seen in many 90s era horror survival games such as Alone in the Dark, Doom, Resident Evil, I do know that one, Diablo, I've played that, Silent Hill, Devil May Cry, which also centered around an Eldritch Knight. The Resident Evil and Silent Hill franchises spawned films and dominated the landscape for the next decade with newer titles like Geist having a hard time competing with the newer titles. So after the release of the visually stunning but critically panned Silent Hill movie sequel, Silent Hill Revelation, something interesting happened. The video game franchise petered out and a new generation of weird video games like Outlast was spawned. Video games like Call of Cthulhu, Darkwood, Sundered, The Shore are directly inspired by the works of HP Lovecraft. But they are not the only titles inspired by the weird. The presence of weird and dark fantasy games is prevalent as well. Final Fantasy is an example, which took a turn for the weird with godlike antagonist Caius Ballad. So today's panel, we have several panelists joining us today to talk about the state of games and our games getting weirder. So first I'd like to start with David Heath.
My name is David Heath, and I am a co-host of the People's Guide to Cthulhu Mythos. I play a character called Farmer Dave. It is not me, despite the fact that I actually do live on a goat farm. And I'm just really glad to be here, and I'm excited.
Thank you, and pleasure to have you. And I'm going to come over here and welcome Sumiko Salson.
Oh, hi. My name's Miko Salson. I'm an author of horror and surrealism. I wrote this. You can see the tentacles right there. And actually, this is a story about a romance between a gamer and, a Greco-Roman dream deity. So there's that. And the reason that the characters in it are gamers is because I'm a gamer and I play games and I love video games a lot, so yeah, that.
Awesome. And DB over here.
Spitzer, yeah, that's
Hi.
me. Hey, how's it going?
Good. How about you?
Oh, doing pretty well, yeah.
Tell us about yourself.
I am DB Spitzer. I am the editor-producer of People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, weird fiction poet, writer, and I don't know, all about kind of weird fiction person. If you have posters for your Kickstarter, they're available at the Kickstarter thing, but the ladies' shirts and camp shirts are not available. That's not part of my bio. That's just an announcement that I'm supposed to be making. All right. And yeah, that's me. And I love video games. I've been playing video games since I was a little kid. I personally think Pac-Man is a horror game because you're being chased by ghosts and you're being forced to run around eating things. Some of them glow and blink. Sometimes you have to eat apples. Miss Pac-Man, don't you eat a key in that? Anyway, Pac-Man, that is a horror game. And yeah, that DB Spitzer.
Thank you for joining us, and it puts Pac-Man in a totally different nightmarish light. Emily.
Hi, everybody. I have 18 different names. You'll hear me give a different one every time. One of them is Ansisa. That's the name in the absolute deadest language I have. And I use 3 different sets of pronouns, one of which is Fae, Femme, Fear, Fierce. I am a TTRPG content creator and streamer. You can currently find me playing an activist witch based on Ursula from The Little Mermaid in Broken Knights on TTRP Theater. I promise. And I'm a big champion for interactive fiction such as TTRPGs, video games, etc., to be recognized as a medium of literature right alongside prose fiction, poetry, etc. And I think it's particularly useful for telling horror stories, as it collapses the role of the storyteller and the audience into one, so that you are telling this story that scares you, and there's no level of separation from the story.
Great, thank you so much for that. And last but never least, Angela.
You're being silenced.
Hello. My voice is silenced. I can speak loudly too. Okay. Sorry, I don't, apparently I'm not very good at technology. My name is Angela Yuriko Smith. I'm a publisher of Space and Time magazine and Yuriko Publishing. I won 2 Stokers and an Elgin and some other things like that. And my son refers to me as a casual gamer. I object to that, but he's probably right. But I did meet my husband on MMO. It was Lord of the Rings Online. And we've been married for 15 years now, so I think that counts me as being a little bit good at this. I've done D&D and board games and computer games, and then my daughter met her husband on WoW, so we have some sideways experience with gaming.
Wonderful, and welcome. So as you can tell from our the backgrounds from our panelists today, there's varying degrees of connection and expertise in playing video games. And so one of the questions I had was, why video games, and what are your favorite ones, and why? I guess I'll start with Emily.
Some of my favorite video games are rather old, but are very much in line with this topic today. One of which is Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem, which was published about 20 years ago, which is a game inspired by HP Lovecraft, in which if your sanity meter gets too low, the game itself starts fucking with you.
I love that game so much.
One of my favorites is when the game convinces you you've bought a trial version.
Oh yeah, or shuts off on you, or yeah.
Off.
Or the volume will go down and be like, wait a minute, this is on a crappy TV that you have to turn the volume up and down on. It's not digital like that.
The game is brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
Also, Psychonauts, although I've not played the sequel, which was eventually published, which is a wonderfully weird game in which you enter the mind states of various and sundry people, and you will be afraid of milkmen forevermore if you get to play that game. But one that I've been rekindling interest in lately is Fallen London, which is a browser game. I think it's the only example nowadays of this browser game that was very popular about 10 years ago, where you just click a bunch of options and that's the game. But it's because it is beautifully written and extremely weird in its fiction and its prose. And who doesn't like a game that greets you with, "Hello there, delicious friend"?
Well, I think I have to go to DB next.
Oh, okay. Question is favorite video games, and for me it is the Fallout franchise. Fallout franchise, what I love about it is there's Lovecraftian elements, but they are so hidden in the background. You have to look for them. And, Lovecraftian games are cool, but I like it when it's hidden. Examples of this are Night in the Woods, which I really like. You really have to find the hidden cult elements in that one until the very end, but they're all over the place. Spoiler alert on a game that's 5 years old. And one that is a little bit more Lovecraftian in nature, if you can look it up, it's Oxenfree, and it's about some teenagers that go to an island and they're carrying around a radio because there's this tradition that if you put these radios by these stacks of stones, you'll get these weird transmissions, and they explore the island and find out where the weird transmissions come from. Spoiler alert. I love video games. I love RPGs in general, tabletop games, Dungeons and Dragons, Shadowrun, Cyberpunk, and the video game. Can't find anything Lovecraftian in Cyberpunk, so it's been making me angry, but Yeah,
It's
I'll
in
find it.
Shadowrun.
It's in Shadowrun, but it's not in Cyberpunk, and it's driving me crazy. But Cyberpunk,
playing it right.
yeah, Cyberpunk itself, if it's played right, is actually horror. So, all right, and that's all I have.
Miko.
Yeah, so I'm a technology early adapter because my dad was into tech, so he had it in the house. So I started playing video games in 1980 when I was 12, and I don't think that Pong is a horror game. And, you know, but I do think that there might be something Lovecraftian about Adventure, which is a game where you hunt dragons, and also the first game that ever had a cookie hidden in it, which is a secret room that has the names of the developers and isn't that great. Anyway, I like RPG type games. I used to love first-person shooter games, so I was playing a lot of Doom and Duke Nukem and stuff like that, but 3D in modern first-person shooter games makes me sick sometimes because I have trouble with motion sickness, which is why I've only played half of the Resident Evil games. I love the franchise, but some of the games make me nauseated. The last game that came, like when Quake came out, that was like the last time they had video games that absolutely did not make me nauseous. So they got too realistic, and my motion sickness kicked in. And then I started playing a lot more RPG style games, so that would be stuff like Elder Scrolls. I'm obsessed with the Dragon Age franchise, very much so, all of them. Final Fantasy, stuff like that, so yeah. And I do play horror video games, Geist being one of them, and I love Silent Hill. Thank you.
David.
So I'm kind of maybe the last person you would expect to be on a video game panel because I'm notorious for making the people walk into the wall. But
It's fun.
I live, well, you know, my daughters are both in college now, and I live with my niece and nephew. And they were all gamers, and I would sit and watch them. And when my daughter Drew was young, we went to see my sister and brother-in-law, and my brother-in-law had Dark Corners of the Earth, and which is a Cthulhu-based game. And my daughter Drew played this for 8 hours straight. And afterwards she says, "Oh, so this is what you've been talking about all these years." And all of a sudden, I've been talking about these books. I love them, and I couldn't get her to read them. But the video game touched her in ways I couldn't. And, I'm very grateful for that because that's one of my favorite bonding experiences. But personal video games is the horrible old man, the video game. You can get this on Steam. And it's basically like an electronic choose-your-own-adventure. And it's got terrible drawing. All the people look like Deep One, but they're not. And so you pay one of the 3 gang members. And you have to basically get all these clues so that you can find out where the horrible old man lives and try to rob him. And there's walkthroughs on YouTube. It takes about 30 minutes. And it's, I'm spoiling what, a 93-year-old story here and a 5-year-old video game. But if you win, the horrible old man gets to kill you. That's the reward. And at the same part, and it's so cheesy, and I love it. But at the same part, I kind of understood these characters better playing through that game than I did just by reading.
When you said the thing about making people walk to walls, it reminded me of my friend Evergrey, and this is why anything can be a horror game, who has papers written up about her now, although people assume she's a guy. She is not a guy, because she did an experiment in The Sims where she made one tiny room and had the Sims sit in there and documented how long it took them to die after peeing on themselves and starving to death. She's not evil, I promise.
I'm not sure how Angela's going to follow that up, but I'd like to see how.
Well, I would have to say that my favorite game would probably be Lord of the Rings Online because I met my husband in there. I was a hobbit at the cooking Melving, trying to get my cooking stats up, and he was a burglar, tall, dark, and handsome, and he came in and stole my heart. But other than that, I would say also, I know it's not technically a game, it's a virtual world, but Second Life is actually where I discovered Lovecraft because it's a virtual world, and people have built anything and everything in there, including probably about 20 iterations of Innsmouth. So that's what I would do is I would explore these wonderfully creepy places and these sacrifices and all that, and you could actually interact and play through the story that way. And then I kind of was like, you know, what the heck is this? So that's how I even found out who Lovecraft was through Second Life. Other than that, I do like Phasmophobia. That's a really fun one, even though you get frustrated because, you know, it's not very scary after a while. And currently I've been playing a lot of Northgard, kind of therapy Northgard. That's what my son says. And he is the one who gets me in games because I start out, he goes, you need to relax. And I say, no, I don't have time. And he goes, here's a game. And I'm like, no, I don't have time for this game. Oh, my for the weekend. Can you please cancel everything? Because I'm playing Northgard. So that's kind of what kind of gamer I am, a reluctant but easily convinced gamer.
Great, thank you. So I have to say that, you know, usually HP Lovecraft is the name that we think of most when we think of weird fiction, and we've been talking about Lovecraftian games. And so one question I have is, you know, why is the Lovecraftian game popular? It seems to be so prevalent and growing in popularity, but why particularly now? I'm sure there's lots of reasons, but I would like to hear your thoughts.
I have a theory, and it's public domain, and it's got a built-in audience.
You took my
It's
answer.
got a built-in audience.
Dang it.
Oh, sorry.
I'll be the anarchist to extend that and tell you that from my perspective, intellectual property is a bad thing.
I just want to say something. First of all, I second the whole cause with Angela saying that about Second Life. And during the beginning of the pandemic, me and Darcy were dating in Second Life because we were actually physically separated, even though we live like 50 miles away from each other. And we were in the Poe lands because there's a whole Poe land in there. There's also Gorian lands and Elven lands where they play nothing but Inya. But I digress.
I like Enya.
Back to the pandemic. I think that the world has always had horrible things in it, but now they're hitting us over here. Like it used to be like you'd read about pandemics someplace else, and now it's over here. And I think that there's so many like things that are scary that are in this world that having a fantasy that takes place in something that's just as way off the beaten trail as what's in HP Lovecraft's mind is becoming more attractive to people because other things that we used to write about that were scary, like pandemics where everyone died, like The Stand, right? You know, who wants to see a remake? I bet someone does want to see a remake of The Stand, but like right at the heart of the pandemic when that first happened, do you think anyone really wanted to see that? I think people, you know, sometimes just wanted something that's less familiar.
How about DB?
Oh, well, I mean, we all said, hey, it's probably because of it's public domain. But because of the fact that it's public domain and then started slipping into comic books and cartoons and video games here and there and then ending up in prestige cable shows and based off of books and, you know, stuff based off of comic books, and then that stuff gets made into video games or gets someone watches that HBO show and goes, you know what? I could do that. I could make a video game with the tentacle monster. I could have great old ones. I could do this kind of thing. I could do some sort of and even stuff that's kind of like tangential to the Cthulhu mythos, like King in Yellow, Hastur, and that kind of stuff showing up in things. It influences. There's not enough King in Yellow video games out there, or King in Yellow influenced video games out there for me, or maybe I just don't know about them. But I mean, it's like, I think because of the fact that it's so easily to access, and it has been parts of cultures that video games come from, America, Japan, France, that we get a lot of that we do. Sorry.
Emily?
I think a large part of it is an expression of marginalized people are able to create video games nowadays. And not only, sometimes I'm mean to Lovecraft and I say that Lovecraftian horror is consisted of what if people of color were right. But it also queers and things are able to make video games now, and there's a way in which we can we identify. I'm speaking as a white queer here. I know I mentioned POCs, but I'm speaking as a white queer. Identify with the monsters and with that which is unexplainable or incomprehensible, or will the way that straight people tell us they experience us sometimes is a lot like the way a Lovecraftian protagonist experiences the mythos, where them understanding our existence and how we work will drive them insane. That is very much the way that they describe their reaction to us sometimes. And now that we are able to make video games, we can reclaim some of these stories, and we can best express some of our experiences and oppressions by telling stories about these vast things that are far beyond the understanding of normal people. And then also I think that we are, we've caused the 6th great extinction event. It is currently going on. Catastrophic global climate change is getting worse and worse and worse. So the idea that there are big impersonal forces that we don't fully understand and can't fully understand, who are killing us because we happened to annoy them, is, I think, just also called the daily news.
Angela, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just besides the fact that it is free domain, I think it's also, horror in general is role play. Kind of going to what other people have said on this panel, we can face the monster. We have this aggression, we have this fear, this terror, but we don't really want to put a true name on it. So we can go into a game like that and we can fight it out and win and get that satisfaction and figure out how to win and empower ourselves. And I kind of think that's one of the reasons. And I also dated in Second Life.
I'm sensing a theme here.
That's the next panel, how to find love online.
Well, we mentioned Poe today, and there are weird fiction games that are not directly tied to Lovecraft, and I wanted to explore that a little bit. In 1995, the Poe-inspired Dark Eye comes to mind as a game. And for instance, Edgar Allan Poe is regarded by many as the first weird fiction author. What are your thoughts about weird games beyond Lovecraft? And should we be using Lovecraft to describe these games anymore? David?
So I think one is Robert E. Howard. And I don't know if you've seen like the original Conan large group game, but there were a bunch of people that were just attacking someone and just giving this poor guy grief. So he figured out how to basically call in Nyarlathotep and wipe out their entire camp. The other one that my nephew so loves that Lovecraft would hate, Cult of the Lamb. I don't know if it's only been out about 2 months, but you're basically the last lamb, and you get sacrificed because you're going to be the prophet to this outer god, and you basically start your own church and cult, and you convert people until you either be the church of the world or you defeat your own god. And I think that Lovecraft seeing these little cutesy lambs would just drive him crazy. But there's obviously Lovecraft elements in it.
Really good point. Miko?
Yeah, so I think that there's a whole bunch of games that are actually based on Dungeons and Dragons. Diablo, that's one. World of Warcraft, that's another one. And Dragon Age that have really weird fiction elements in them that really probably come from the imaginations of people that have been playing tabletop games for years and years and years, because you do that and you get weird. I mean, the tabletop game that I played was ElfQuest, based on the ElfQuest comics, because that's what I did. Even ElfQuest has Mad Coil, which is weird. So I think that, Poe is someone who had a mental illness, and HP Lovecraft is someone who had a mental illness, someone who has, and I think that a lot of the images that you see in weird horror are images that you see that are going on in the minds of people that hallucinate and stuff like that, which is why games like Silent Hill have a whole bunch of scary things that are half hallucinations and experiences that people have that are taking place in dreamlike settings and stuff like that. And they're not all necessarily directly connected to Lovecraft, but they're definitely weird fiction. And then finally, I would say that horror as a genre has a very large intersection with weird fiction. So there are many horror video games that are weird.
Angela, do you have any thoughts?
I do. I always want to say that Pokemon is a pretty dark game.
I was
honestly.
just thinking about Pokemon.
Yeah, you're like literally capturing. What does the professor do when he takes the Pokemon back? I mean, how does he recycle them? But besides Pokemon, where you're keeping these animals locked in balls until you need them to fight each other, Cult of the Lamb. Thank you. I forgot about that one. I freaking love that game because you can like set yourself up to be worshipped. You can't tell people that in polite conversation that, yeah, I'd love to be worshipped and be like a god, and kill everybody that worships me. But in Cult of the Lamb,
You can marry all your followers.
all of them, and if you don't like them, just kill them. I mean, that's like a really good setup. Practical. But also, Monster Hunter is like you kind of get to fight Cthulhu, like you're fighting the monsters, the incredibly huge, scary monsters. So Monster Hunter is another one that I think of like that. There's a lot of like these really cool little 2D games now. There's like an Alice in Wonderland one I can't think of the name of, but yeah.
Facebook games, they had so many different like little flash games, like this hospital game that was just, it was like what you said about the weird old man. Yeah.
DB?
All right. I have been playing a couple of games lately that I don't think they're meant to be horror games. One is meant to be a horror game, Project Zomboid, which you just start out in a house in the middle of a zombie apocalypse, and you can change like how it is, how many zombies there are, if they're fast, if they're strong, if they can smell stuff, if they're just dumb and bump into stuff. And you can turn zombies off and just have survivors, and then like how likely are the survivors going to turn against each other after what time? And the zombie part is too scary for me to play. It's like, and so I just turn that off and then like treat it like a survival horror thing like The Road. And it's like, it's frozen outside. I'm digging through houses looking for food, and some guy named Carl comes in with red. His name's Carl in red, and he's got a gun, and I only have a screwdriver. And I'm like, ugh. And the other one I've been playing is I don't think it's supposed to be a horror game at all. It's called RimWorld. And it's a kind of a colony survival game, and it gets grim and it gets dark. And it's like, oh, there's only 2 of us. We've had to eat all of the animals. I don't know who's going to make it the next night. It's dark winter, and it becomes like this Jack London, almost like... I don't know. It gets dark. It gets scary. It's like, oh shoot, this is, and I'll come inside and tell my partner, it's like, yeah, no, the dogs attacked us while we were trying to get away from the bandits, and it was just a bloodbath. Well, what happened to your farm? It burned. It just burned everything. There's nothing left, and I can't even go back to a later save because it's just everything's gone. But yeah, those are the horror games I'm playing.
That reminds me of...
I need to play games with you.
Whatchamacallit. That reminds me of Left 4 Dead, and also Chainsaw Lollipop. Definitely,
need to play that.
yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of good zombie weird out there.
I just have to say that I'm going to get to Emily, but I have to stop and just say that there's so much joy and delight emanating from this panel and everywhere in the audience when we talk about zombies and horror and
Eating each other.
Yeah, no, it's really pleasant. Okay, Emily.
I mean, who here literally wants to be eaten when they die? And I'm not actually joking. Oh, hey,
one.
somebody else.
We
That's
got
awesome.
Found your people.
I found my people, Angela and whoever it was I didn't see raise their hand.
Hands down now.
I mentioned Fallen London earlier, that browser-based click options in a story kind of game. And one of my favorite things about it is, to a certain extent, like I think of cosmic horror and gothic horror as kind of geometrically opposed, if that makes sense. And that cosmic horror, if you're setting aside all the other issues with like Lovecraft, is about you don't matter and nothing you do will ever matter. And gothic fiction is about your emotions are the only thing that matter. And in Fallen London, plug your ears because I'm going to spoil a revelation from like 7 years ago. In Fallen London, you discover that the big cosmic horror element is a space manta collecting love letters to convince the sun that love is still possible after it delivers the breakup letter. So it's incredibly gothic and also very Lovecraftian because individual human lives don't matter in this giant, fantastic thing, except that they do. And I love that particular blend of two geometrically opposed things, collapsing them into a single thing. Okay. Another genre of what I would consider cosmic horror games that a lot of people wouldn't consider cosmic horror games that I've gotten into quite a bit at one point was there was a bit of a fad of trans women writing art games to express to cis people what it's like to live under transphobia. And the reason I call them cosmic horror games is just like Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem fucks with you when your sanity meter gets too low. The point of these games is that it is literally impossible to win. There is no way to win these games because that's what it's like to live under transphobia. So there's that. And then final one I just want to mention is a game that I want to play because I've only encountered it through its card game, is The Binding of Isaac, which appears to be, like I said, I want to play it. I haven't played it yet. I've only played the card game. A wonderfully cosmic game about a boy who may or may not be God and may or may not be dead and may or may not be locked in a chest by his mother. And I definitely want to play that game.
I'm going to make that my new bio.
Okay, so I'm going to go a little bit off script and just ask this question because I was thinking about the games that I play, and I was thinking of like Portal and GLaDOS and some of these things that I've experienced playing those games. I hadn't really thought of those as being weird horror games. So one question that popped into my head is, what makes a video game weird?
Yeah, I'm going to take this because now I can talk about games that have become weird over time. So Final Fantasy is a game that has some dark chapters, and I want to talk about 13 because I wonder if the number 13 is why it got so dark. So when you get to 13-2, time has broke, and now you're in a weird fiction game because time is broken. So you're in a game that at the end of the game, time stops being a thing that works. Therefore, there's no progress. And the reason why is because for time to... So what makes this weird? Because I'm going to start talking about this game in a lot of detail. What makes this weird is in Cosmic is that now you're dealing with things that are really like, there are these constructs that we live within that we sort of feel are real, and we've come up with language to convince ourselves that they're real, but if they're not real, then the things that moor us to reality are now breaking apart in a big, scary way, which is the essence of cosmic horror. So in this particular game, in order for there are multiple timelines, but in order for a timeline to break off from the other timeline, this goddess has to die, and her caregiver is in love with her and doesn't want her to die, so decides that to protect this person that he loves, he is going to destroy time. That's cosmic horror now.
It's amazing. David, do you have any thoughts?
So when Weird Tales published, weird meant scary. So it's changed. And so I think that there's two types of weird video games. There's the Weird Tales, the scary, maybe even three. There's the scary, there's the pulp, and then there's the eccentric, the different. And I think that you can take all three. You can take pulp action elements, you can take scary, and people that tend to be drawn towards, especially role-playing games, they like the strange. I like the strange. And people who are making games either commercially or as a labor of love, they know that. They know their audience. So I think there's three different types of weird in video games now.
And I forgot, but what you said earlier about Gothic and weird horror, when I was reading about the history of weird horror, what they said was that it was something that was actually in direct opposition to Gothic horror, so you're right.
Yay, the academics agree with me.
Well, Emily, do you have anything to add?
I think to one extent, I think what I have to say is that if a particular idea or story or world or what have you goes far enough, goes long enough, it will become, it becomes one, the other, or both of two things, which is either mythopoetic, which we know from Tolkien and etc., or weird. And I think that's because, in this sense at least, they mean essentially the same thing, where the world, the story, the idea, the characters, etc., have gotten to the point where they can create their own meaning, just out of their interaction and their progressions, not out of any relation to what happens in this story we call the real world. It's my least favorite story, the real world. It's kind of boring. But it becomes an engine of meaning all on its own. And if that engine of meaning produces things that easily comment on the world outside of that story, then we call it mythopoeia. But if it creates things that do not easily comment on things in this world, we call it weird. So it's essentially the same thing. It's just a matter of whether it is easy to apply to our usual life, is the difference between mythopoeia and weird in my mind. As for video games particularly, I think my favorite thing that makes a video game weird is when it fucks with you. But I've expressed that already times.
All right, now DB and Angel have to arm wrestle to see who goes next. Okay, DB.
All right. So Second Life. No, I'm kidding.
It is weird.
Second Life makes video games weird?
One of my favorite weird games that I'm starting to realize might actually be cosmic horror, weird series, is the Katamari series, where the King of the Cosmos gives you the task of going down to Earth and rolling up civilization slowly and casting it into the sky, because the King of Cosmos got drunk and destroyed all the stars, and you as the Prince of Cosmos, or like Sathagwa, maybe, that's who it is, but it's actually the prince, and it's got a big carpet head thing. It's like a sideways rolled up carpet. Yeah.
Rolled up carpet.
Yeah. And it's just, you start out small and you get big, and it's like, this is the story of a great old one. It's, I don't know, and it's people. It's rolling up people sometimes. It's rolling up cars. It's rolling up all the animals. It's rolling up cities. It's rolling up countries.
Escape it.
You can't escape it, and it's inevitable.
I asked my nephew what the weirdest game is that he played, and that's what he said.
Okay.
So I've been sensing God complex needs to be part of this game. All right, Angela, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do want to also say thank you for now getting that song stuck in my head again. It's been like 5 or 6 years that I managed to get it out of my head. I think it's really a point of view, because for me, I really like weird stuff, but my life is kind of weird anyways. So something like phasmophobia isn't really scary. There's just a lot that doesn't affect me. Is like, this isn't normal. And I am that person that somebody will say, oh, that's like really unusual. I'll go, is it? Doesn't that happen all the time? So I think it really is a point of view because other people, like my daughter, I probably am responsible for this somehow, just like she couldn't even get near phasmophobia. If she just hears that little like, as it's like killing you, she's like freaked out, nightmares for a week. So I think it is a point of view, but I think I want to say all games are weird in a way because why would you want to play life? But then I think of like Diner Dash and Farmville and those little farmy ones that I can't think of what they are, but they're really cute. You know, it's kind of real life, I guess.
Yeah, I sense like a theme of, well, dating, but also a theme of storytelling and mythos building that as a player you can really kind of create your own world or manipulate the world or experience the world in a different way because the laws of physics or the rules are completely malleable.
Either
Speaking
way.
of
I just-
oh, I'm sorry.
Oh no, I just realized during this conversation that Sonic the Hedgehog and Super Mario Brothers.
We are here to ruin all your
Everything
childhood
weird
games.
is
is weird and cosmic.
Very weird
That's
and
the
cosmic.
new law.
Right. I will mention, Angela mentioned Pokemon earlier. I will mention that some of those animals that you can catch in a ball and force to fight each other that your professor somehow weirdly like recycles, some of those are the literal gods that created space and time.
Yeah. Oh, and demons.
That's their
And
names,
yokai.
yeah.
Yeah, and demons, because the Mischievous is a Nekekubi, which is a headless vampire that roams around eating people. So, you know.
So the Elder Gods are coming in these video games that are for kids. Got it.
Yep. Also, as historical notes, just because I wanted to, I like pushing forward the narrative that trans people aren't new, and they aren't new in video games. Super Mario Brothers 2 had the first transgender video game character, Burdette, who was renamed Birdo, or I always forget which direction it was, but was made cis in the United States. Okay. And Janelle Jacques is a trans woman who was hugely influential in the development of both Dungeons and Dragons and video games, though I can't remember what video games she worked on. But they were all originally published under her dead name because she hadn't publicly transitioned yet.
And so I was going to say, doing research for this panel, I discovered that there are Lovecraft dating games. And I have to admit, I found 5 of them, and I did not have the guts to push the button.
Wait.
Because I was afraid of what I'd find.
Are they Lovecraftian dating, or are they dating Lovecraft? Because the second one, fuck that.
No.
He's been dead for a
You speed
while.
date with Hastur and Cthulhu and Narvathotep.
Oh, Hastur is sexy. I have to figure out how to play these games.
Wow. Okay, so we are about 15 minutes before our panel is over, discussion is over. So I wanted to open up for questions because we've been talking for a while. But you know what? We want to hear from our audience and get some questions in. Oh, go ahead. So the question is about Darkwood and I guess the description of it as folklore horror or cosmic horror. What makes it one or the other or both? You want to take that?
I'm not familiar with that game, but there are a lot of things that use Lovecraftian tropes that are not necessarily Lovecraftian.
And we apologize that Sarah's not here to talk about that game.
I will say, like I alluded to it earlier, but I don't know the game. I've not played the game. But it is, I think, fairly easy for something to be both Lovecraftian horror and folk horror. See my earlier comment about how Lovecraftian horror can be defined as what if the people of color were right? And he's referencing folklore in that, or we're talking about folklore in that. So it's very easy to be both.
Okay.
I haven't played it either, so now I'm wondering which of us mentioned that.
Sarah mentioned it and isn't here. And also, I don't know how I got through this whole panel without talking about, Corypheus in Dragon Age. Yeah, exactly. And yeah.
Are there any more questions? Go ahead. So the question is, how does this dynamic work between weird fiction and gaming, and whether or not the storytelling, maybe the mechanics of either one influence the other, or it's a back and forth, maybe there's, some sort of equal balance happening.
I'm
Any thoughts on
excited
that?
because now I can talk about Corypheus. So, like, in Dark Age, yeah, exactly. So, in Dragon Age, what happened is that at the beginning, they had this thing called the Blight, where you had these zombie-like creatures that are stumbling around. But they don't really tell you why, but they tell you about the religion of the people in Dragon Age. So as the series moves forward, elements of the religion start popping up because they've got to go somewhere. And as people said earlier, it's in the public domain, right? So as they start talking about the religion, all of a sudden you get up to Inquisition. Obviously, there's a lot of religion in that game. And they have, one, a character that you don't know is actually an ancient elven god. So there's that. And two, a half zombie, half mage, just villain, just like everything bad, they mixed it together. And now you've got that elven god has decided the thing to do is to tear down the wall between the veil and the land of sleep and stuff, and where we all, dream, the dream world. You know how that's in Lovecraft? You know about the Lovecraft stories about the dreams. So he's going to tear the veil down and just let that come into the regular world. So now you've just gotten really Lovecraftian in 4 different games. I think that what happens is with these series of games, because you have a lot of games that are popular that continue to go on, it's just like with television series or anything else that's episodic. Because of its episodic nature, people start to need more material. Like if you watch Supernatural, you saw that. Like they had the Leviathans, right? And all of a sudden it got weird. It just gets weird because they need new material. So I think that with video games, as with other media, it is the episodic nature of things that creates more weirdness.
I'll add a little bit. I play a lot of board games, actually, and so we were just playing Planet Apocalypse. A lot of Sandy Peterson games are about the Lovecraftian themes. And what I've discovered with the legacy games is that you uncover bits and pieces of the storytelling and the story as you go and play the game. So Pandemic Legacy is another example where you're uncovering that, there might be a secret society or a conspiracy happening. So I think there's a lot of play and a lot of cross-pollination that can happen. And in particular with video gaming storytelling, I think it's a little bit different because all the characters may have functions. They might be passive, they might be interactive, and all those decisions have to be kind of made with an overarching mission or problem solving that has to come in. So it's fairly complex. I would say it's actually much harder than prose writing.
Speaking of Sandy Peterson, in addition to the board games, he also is the creator of Call of Cthulhu.
I was going to say, somebody else said it. Oh, hey.
As well as he did about 17 levels of Diablo and most of Quake.
Doom and Quake, yeah. No, and there's like, oh goodness, there's several creatures in Quake that are actually named after Lovecraftian entities or the Cthulhu mythos type stuff. My brain is not working.
Yeah, and then you got the movies that are literally being made, because things like Doom is a movie, Resident Evil is a movie. So as these things become movies and stuff, then people watch the movies and they get influenced in it. So it just ends up becoming this big, weird and cosmic fiction circle jerk or whatever.
I think, sorry, I heard circle jerk and got distracted. I think that in TTRPGs, which I like for speed to call titterpigs. So in titterpigs, I think Lovecraft, like cosmic horror, weird fiction has been there from the beginning, with the Lovecraftian mythos showing up in the first printing of deities and demigods right next door to the mythoi that they didn't have the copyright to publish, and Sandy Peterson creating Call of Cthulhu. And I think it has, ever since then, has been one of the most fruitful difficulties in writing a titterpig, because in a titterpig you're accessing everything, the world, the story, etc., through a character. So it is very easy to tell like things on the gothic horror side of things, because it's their emotions and their reactions that are your main focus. And so the idea of trying to figure out how to portray cosmic horror or weird fiction in a medium that is so privileged against it has been the cause of more innovation in that particular genre and medium than almost, I think, any other question. And you can see that through story games, the story game movement and things developed from it, narrativist games that are trying to express how to talk about emotional states in this. 10 Candles comes to mind. 10 Candles is a game in which you're going to die. That is the point of the game. There are 10 candles lit. Every time somebody fails, you blow out a candle and everything gets harder. It is a very bleak game, but it is designed in such a way that the mechanics of the game itself are creating that bleakness so that you are then able to express the feelings and emotions of the character. It's creating that existentialist thing I love so much of nothing you do matters, therefore everything you do matters. So you can see it very clearly in that, as well as the desire to give actions consequences, which you can see in games like Sleepaway, in which is a folk horror game affecting a summer camp. But I think finally, and perhaps most interestingly, is that the nature of a titterpig's mechanics, and I would say this is true in video games as well, I'm just not quite as well versed, lend itself to a weird fiction or cosmic horror, particularly if you're using a random number generator to determine the success or failure of an action, because it often refuses to conform to narrative expectations, right? So there is a weird fiction cosmic horror element of I am the big hero and I'm facing off against the great red dragon and I roll a 1 and trip and fall on my sword, right? That's humorous. We play that for humor, but it is also like a difficult text saying that narrative conventions do not matter, and then your character has to figure out how to react to that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cross-pollination between tabletop and video games like Diablo and, of course, Call of Cthulhu, of course.
Fun fact, in the United States, if you're explaining RPGs to somebody, you say it's kind of like D&D. As I understand it in Japan, when you're explaining RPGs to somebody, you say it's kind of like Call of Cthulhu.
Mm-hmm. Any thoughts from DB or Angela about this? And then
Now, I was just going to point out how fertile the gaming and the writing world is. Like, I'm writing I'm writing diary entries for somebody's game right now that they're producing and they're amazed that, like, a writer, that's like bread and butter to us, right? Oh, you want like a couple of paragraphs? I'm going to give you 3 pages. Just choose what you want. Edit out the rest. I'm used to seeing my work just trash. But also, it's becoming part of our lives. We've got movies now like Player One, and there was that other one that just came out that I love, and I can't think of the name of it because I'm sitting here on stage with people looking at me. But there's been several of these movies that talk about gaming as part of our lives, like Reality is Breaking Down, and all that fertileness. Like, when are writers going to be just on paper anymore? Are we going to be writers that are also in the games? Like Witcher wasn't really, all right, I know there's an argument here. Witcher wouldn't be The Witcher without the game. Like, nobody would have read the books. If Witcher hadn't become a game, then it would not have become a series either. So
Yeah, and The Walking Dead had a comic book and a video game.
Yeah, so it's like we're all kind of the same ground now, feeding each other. Gamers, games, game creators, writers, and it's starting to just be content. We're creating content and interactive content.
Yeah, no. 2 years ago, I was playing Fallout 76 with Cody Goodfellow, and, we talked about RPGs, we talked about horror stuff, we just talked about junk while we were shooting big flying monsters. And, and it's like the people I know who make video games, they read the books that other people I know make. It's like I talk to a lot of people on my podcast, people who make video games, people who are game developers of all sorts, filmmakers, writers, and everyone's into this stuff, and we all kind of cross-pollinate each other in a weird Lovecraftian way. And I think it's great. I think it's wonderful and it's weird, and I can't wait to see more of this with a combination of the two. Writers and game developers and everyone getting together and artists, and I want to see something in VR that, makes people go, oh wow, this is like hardcore drug visuals, but Lovecraftian, and that's a future I think we could all live in.
I used to live on that land.
Well, we're reaching the end of our time for today, and if there are more questions, you can always come and talk to us afterwards. But before we end, I wanted to give each of our panelists a chance to shout out the name of a video game that should be played by everyone, as well as how to find them on social media. Starting with Emily, we'll just go in order.
Starting with me. What video game should everyone play? I'm going to shout out Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, just for the sheer amount of lore that it managed to pack into that game, many of which is very weird for the same reasons that I mentioned earlier of a story building its own meaning eventually. They packed a quarter century of active RPG publishing's lore into that game. And as for where to find me, if you're interested in finding me and all of my work, you can visit my link tree. It's a website with a bunch of links, shockingly. And that is linktr.ee/queer mythopoeia, QUEERMYTHOPOEIA.
Wow, a video game everyone should play. I guess everybody should play, wow, all of them. Just play all of the video games. I was gonna say Duke Nukem or maybe Chainsaw Lollipop for reasons. I'm not gonna talk about Dragon Age anymore, I promise.
Aww.
Yeah, but my name is Sumiko Salson, and oh God, I'm going to talk about Final Fantasy. This is my book, Happiness and Other Diseases. It's about a love affair between a guy with bipolar disorder who likes to play games on the Xbox and a Greco-Roman dream deity who likes to play games on the PlayStation. Despite their whole PlayStation Xbox thing, they managed to kind of make things work. And I read it at the library, and I have it, so you can come and ask me about it. But also, I'm on www.sumikosalson.com. That's SUMIKOSAULSON.com.
Thank you.
My name is David Heath, and best to find us is on Facebook as the People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, as well as I say the game I would recommend, Cult of the Lamb, just for the graphics, if not also for this homicidal lamb, but that's
But also.
bonus.
Sold.
I'm DB Spitzer, yeah. I already said that part at the beginning. It's been a long day. I want to tell everyone, Project Zomboid, there's nothing like that feeling of dismantling a large bed in a hotel room in somewhere in Kentucky and having having to turn around every couple of moments to see if there's a zombie coming for you, just so that you can board up the window and sleep on the floor. Take apart the bed so you can have a safe place to sleep. Great. I can be found on Instagram, PGTTCM, People's Guide to the Cthulhu Mythos, but at PGTTCM is Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and recently did a thing with Scott Glancy and Dave and Ken Hite. Yeah, I was like, who's that other guy? Ken Hite. And we talked about all kinds of cool stuff, and yeah, that's available on YouTube right now.
I'm going to say Life is Strange, not because it's so weird or horrific, because it was an amazing, amazing interactive story that made me cry and made my son cry, and we cried together. And when you see your 23-year-old son cry with you and then dye his hair to match the characters, you know that's a good game. And also, my daughter has a voice part in Vampire Masquerade. She's one of the prostitutes in the bathroom.
In which game? In which game?
So, and if you want to look for me, my name is Angela Yuriko Smith, but you can find me at AngelaYSmith, supereasy.com.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and that's a great way to end. I don't know how we would end otherwise without a prostitute in the bathroom.
I mean, all of my best dates end with a prostitute in the bathroom.
I literally was gonna say Duke Nukem because the police officers say lard on, and they're pigs. They're like mutated pigs. But yeah, okay.
Thank you all, and I think this concludes
And
our
there's
panel
prostitutes.
discussion. But we'll be here for questions.
Strippers too.